Eleanor Whitmore stood in the shadowed library, hands trembling as she clutched the leather portfolio she was never meant to find. Inside, bank transfers, legal documents, letters written in Adrian Blackthorne's precise hand, all proving the heartless Duke had been saving her family from ruin while she'd spent months despising him. The man she'd publicly humiliated just hours ago at Lady Pemberton's ball, calling him cold and calculating to his face, had been their silent protector all along. Her pride had blinded her completely. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The morning Eleanor Whitmore decided she hated Duke Adrian Blackthorne, London was drowning in unseasonable rain. She stood at the window of her family's townhouse on Grosvenor Square, watching water stream down the glass in ugly rivulets, distorting the world outside into something unrecognizable. Fitting, really. In the 3 weeks since her father's death, everything familiar had twisted into shape she no longer understood. Eleanor, you're not even listening. She turned from the window to find her younger sister Beatrice perched on the settee, arms crossed, lower lip jutting out in that way that had charmed their father into indulgence, but did absolutely nothing for Eleanor. I'm listening, Eleanor lied. Then what did I just say? Something about Lord Pembroke's garden party. That was 10 minutes ago, Beatrice huffed. I was talking about the Duke of Blackthorne. Everyone says he's returning to London today after 3 years abroad. Caroline Ashworth claims he's even more handsome than before, though she also said his disposition has grown positively glacial, which I think rather defeats the purpose of handsomeness, don't you? Eleanor returned her attention to the rain. I'm sure I don't care either way. Well, you should. Mama thinks he might be a prospect. That got her attention. Eleanor spun around. For you? Don't be ridiculous. For you, obviously. You're the eldest. You're the one who needs to… Beatrice caught herself, but the damage was done. Needs to save the family? Eleanor finished, voice flat. Needs to marry well now that father's gone and left us in such a precarious position? You can say it, Bea. I'm aware of my duty. Beatrice had the grace to look ashamed. At 17, she still possessed that soft prettiness that would serve her well in a few years on the marriage mart. Eleanor, at 23, knew she'd missed the prime bloom of youth that society valued. Not that she'd been a diamond even at 18. Too tall, too sharp-featured, too prone to speaking her mind when silence would have served better. I didn't mean it like that, Beatrice said quietly. Yes, you did, and you're right. Eleanor smoothed her black morning dress, feeling the weight of the fabric like chains. 6 more months of this before she could even think about re-entering society properly. 6 months of half-mourning while the creditors circled and her mother pretended everything was fine. But Duke Blackthorne, even if you were interested, which I can't imagine, is hardly the answer. Why not? He's wealthy beyond measure, titled young enough, and reportedly insufferable. Eleanor moved away from the window, restless energy driving her across the room. Lady Hartwick told Mama he's arrogant to the point of cruelty. Lord Densworth called him calculating and cold. Even his own friends describe him as remote. Lord Densworth is an idiot who lost £3,000 at cards last season, Beatrice pointed out, and Lady Hartwick is bitter because the Duke refused to dance with her daughter. Perhaps the reports are exaggerated, or perhaps where there's smoke, there's fire. Eleanor stopped at the mantelpiece, staring at the miniature portrait of their father displayed there. God, she missed him. For all his faults, and there had been many, as they'd discovered after his death, he'd never made her feel like a commodity to be traded. I won't marry someone heartless just for financial security. Even if the alternative is losing everything? The question hung in the air between them, ugly and unavoidable. Eleanor didn't answer because there was no good answer. The truth was that her father, beloved as he'd been, had been a disaster with money. Investments in schemes that collapsed, loans to friends who never repaid, a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford, maintained through increasingly desperate borrowing. They'd only begun to understand the extent of it after the funeral, when the creditors started appearing like vultures. The townhouse was mortgaged, the country estate was mortgaged. Her mother's jewelry, already sold, though Mother didn't know it yet. Her father had been selling pieces gradually, replacing them with paste copies. Eleanor had discovered that particular horror while going through his papers. They were, in short, nearly ruined. And the only thing standing between them and complete social annihilation was Eleanor's ability to make a brilliant match. No pressure at all. I should go help Mama with correspondence, Beatrice said, rising. She paused at the door. I'm sorry, Ellie. I know this isn't fair. Life rarely is, Eleanor replied, mustering a smile she didn't feel. Go on, I'll be fine. Alone again, Eleanor sank into the chair Beatrice had vacated and let her head fall back against the cushion. The house was too quiet. Even the servants moved through the halls like ghosts now, uncertain of their futures. How long before they couldn't pay wages? How long before the whispers about the Whitmore finances became shouts? She needed to think practically. Make a list. That's what her father had always done when facing a problem, though clearly his lists hadn't been particularly effective. Eligible gentleman of means currently in London, Lord Pembroke, 60 if he was a day, and his breath smelled of onions. Sir Richard Caldwell, possible, though rumors suggested his fortune was tied up in ventures of questionable legality. Viscount Hartley, already courting the Davenport girl. And then, apparently, Duke Adrian Blackthorne, the mysterious duke who'd spent 3 years on the continent doing God knows what, returning to London with a reputation that preceded him like a cold wind. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to imagine it. Imagine smiling prettily at a man everyone described as arrogant. Imagine making herself agreeable to someone calculating and cold. Imagine spending the rest of her life walking on eggshells around a husband who viewed her as little more than an ornament. She'd rather eat glass. But what choice did she have? The rain had stopped by the time Eleanor ventured out that afternoon, though the streets remained slick and treacherous. Her mother had requested she pick up a parcel from the dressmaker's shop on Bond Street, one of the few vendors who hadn't yet demanded immediate payment, and Eleanor welcomed the excuse to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house. Their maid, Jenny, accompanied her, trailing a few steps behind as Eleanor navigated around puddles and passing carriages. London smelled like wet stone and horse dung, the usual perfume of the city intensified by the damp. She tried to find it charming and failed. The dressmaker's shop was warm at least, fragrant with fabric and lavender sachets. Madame Dubois greeted her with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask the calculation in her eyes. Even the shopkeepers were doing math now, Eleanor thought, wondering if the Whitmores were good for the debt. Miss Whitmore, how lovely to see you. I have your mother's parcel ready. The alterations came out beautifully, if I do say so myself. I'm sure they're perfect, Madame Dubois. Shall I? The door chimed behind her, and Eleanor glanced back out of habit, then froze. The man who entered was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it. His coat was impeccably tailored but rain-spotted, and there was mud on his boots that made Madame Dubois' smile tighten fractionally. But it was his face that caught Eleanor's attention. Strong features, sharp cheekbones, a mouth set in a firm line that suggested smiling was something he'd heard of but never personally attempted. And his eyes, gray, like the London sky, and just as cold. He swept the shop with a single dismissive glance that somehow managed to assess and discard everything in one go, including Eleanor herself. She felt the look like a physical touch, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Madame Dubois, he said, his voice clipped and precise. I believe you have a package for the Duchess of Blackthorne. Eleanor's breath caught. This was him. This was the Duke everyone had been whispering about. Your Grace! Madame Dubois practically fluttered across the shop. Of course, of course. I have it right here. Please, do sit down. May I offer you tea? No. He didn't elaborate, didn't soften the refusal with pleasantries. Just stood there like he owned the world and was mildly disappointed by the quality. Eleanor found herself staring. She couldn't help it. There was something almost mesmerizing about such complete self-assurance, even if it came wrapped in arrogance. As if sensing her attention, the Duke's gaze cut to her. For a moment their eyes met, and Eleanor felt her spine straighten automatically, chin lifting. She refused to be intimidated by some pompous, Miss Whitmore, isn't it? She blinked. He knew who she was. Yes, Your Grace. The formality tasted bitter in her mouth, but breeding held. He nodded once, a bare acknowledgement that conveyed absolutely nothing. No sympathy for her recent loss. No attempt at polite conversation, just that single nod. And then his attention returned to Madame Dubois, as if Eleanor had ceased to exist. The dismissal was so complete, so absolute, that Eleanor felt her face flush with sudden anger. This was the man her mother thought she should pursue. This cold, arrogant statue of a human being who couldn't even manage basic courtesy. "Your package, Miss Whitmore," Madame Dubois said, appearing at her elbow with wrapped parcel. The poor woman was practically sweating, trying to attend to both of them at once. "Thank you," Eleanor managed, taking the bundle. She should leave. The polite thing would be to leave. But something stubborn in her spine kept her rooted to the spot, kept her eyes on the Duke as he accepted his own package with barely a word of thanks. He turned to go, and Eleanor found herself speaking before her brain could catch up to her mouth. "Your Grace." He paused, one hand on the door, and looked back, waiting. Not even curious, just waiting. Eleanor's mind went utterly blank. What had she meant to say? Why had she stopped him? I wanted to offer my congratulations on your return to London. I'm sure society has missed your presence." It was insipid and false, and they both knew it. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in those gray eyes. Amusement? Contempt? She couldn't tell. "How kind," he said, the words perfectly polite and completely devoid of warmth. "Though I suspect society survived my absence with remarkable fortitude. Good day, Miss Whitmore." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a definitive click. Eleanor stood frozen, her face burning, aware that Madame Dubois and Jenny were both staring at her. "Well," she said brightly, clutching her package like a shield, "what a thoroughly unpleasant man." Jenny made a small noise that might have been agreement or horror, hard to say which. Madame Dubois had the grace to look away. Eleanor fled. By the time she reached home, Eleanor had worked herself into a fine temper. How dare he? How dare he look at her like she was something insignificant, speak to her like she was barely worth the breath it took? She'd heard the Duke was cold, but she hadn't expected such blatant rudeness. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that tiny traitorous corner of her mind that had to admit he was extraordinarily handsome, which only made it worse. Beautiful people got away with too much already without being actively cruel about it. "Eleanor, is that you?" Her mother's voice floated down from the drawing room. "Come up, dear. We have a visitor." Eleanor's heart sank. Please, not a creditor. She couldn't handle a creditor right now, not with her blood still boiling from the encounter with Blackthorn. But when she entered the drawing room, she found her mother entertaining a woman she didn't recognize, older, elegantly dressed, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Eleanor, darling, this is the Duchess of Blackthorn. She's come to call." The world tilted slightly. Eleanor's eyes went to the package she still carried, the one the Duke had collected from Madame Dubois, for his mother, who was apparently here, now. "Your Grace," Eleanor managed, dropping into a curtsy that felt rusty from disuse. "What an honor. Please sit." The Duchess gestured to the chair beside her, and Eleanor obeyed numbly. "I wanted to pay my respects regarding your father. I knew him slightly, years ago. He was always very kind to me." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I also wanted to formally welcome you to the neighborhood, as it were. My son has just returned from the continent, and I'm hoping to encourage him back into society. I thought perhaps, if you and your family are receiving again after your mourning period, you might attend a small dinner party I'm planning next month." Eleanor's mother practically vibrated with suppressed excitement. A dinner party at the Blackthorn townhouse, an invitation that would signal to all of London that the Whitmores were still socially viable. "We would be honored," her mother said before Eleanor could respond. "Wouldn't we, Eleanor?" "Of course," Eleanor heard herself say, even as her mind screamed in protest. A dinner party, with the Duke, with his cold eyes and colder demeanor. The Duchess smiled, and Eleanor noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something tired there, something worn. "Wonderful. I know Adrian can be, somewhat reserved. He's had a difficult few years. I hope you'll all be patient with him as he readjusts to London." Difficult few years. Reserved. These were mother's euphemisms for "my son is an insufferable ass," Eleanor suspected. They made polite conversation for another 20 minutes, the weather, the season, mutual acquaintances, before the Duchess took her leave. The moment the door closed behind her, Eleanor's mother whirled around, face alight. Do you know what this means? An invitation from the Duchess herself. Eleanor, this could be the answer to everything. Mama, the Duke is unmarried, wealthy, titled. If he were to show you any interest at all, he won't. Eleanor thought of those cold gray eyes, that dismissive nod. Trust me, Mama, the Duke has no interest in me whatsoever. Her mother's face fell. But surely if you made an effort— I met him today, at Madame Dubois' shop. Eleanor set down the package with perhaps more force than necessary. He was rude, cold, and arrogant. Everything the rumors said and worse. I wouldn't marry him if he were the last man in England. Eleanor Frances Whitmore, you will not speak that way. Her mother's voice cracked like a whip. Do you think I don't know how dire our situation is? Do you think I haven't noticed the creditors circling? We are drowning, and you are too proud to grab the rope being thrown to us. The words hit like physical blows. Eleanor stared at her mother, seeing for the first time the deep lines around her eyes, the gray threading through her hair, the way her hands shook slightly as she pressed them together. I know, Eleanor said quietly. I know, Mama, but I can't. I won't marry someone who treats people like they're beneath him. I won't spend my life trying to win warmth from someone incapable of giving it. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened. Your father loved me. Did you know that? On our wedding day, I barely knew him. I certainly didn't love him, but he was kind and patient, and eventually I learned to love him too. She crossed to Eleanor, taking her hands. I'm not asking you to love the Duke. I'm asking you to save us. Save your sister. Save our future. Can you do that? Eleanor wanted to say no. Wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all. The way women were always the ones expected to sacrifice, to bend, to accommodate. But she looked at her mother's desperate eyes and her sister's hopeful face. Beatrice had crept into the doorway, listening, and felt the weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders like a lead cloak. I'll try, she whispered. At the dinner party, I'll try. Her mother's relief was palpable. That's all I ask. But as Eleanor climbed the stairs to her room that evening, she couldn't shake the memory of the Duke's face in the shop. The way he'd looked through her rather than at her. The complete absence of anything resembling human warmth. She'd told her mother she would try, but how did you win over someone who seemed to have no heart to win? Yats. The weeks leading up to the Duchess's dinner party passed in a strange blur. Eleanor found herself caught between two worlds, the public face she had to maintain and the private reality of their crumbling finances. During the day, she made calls with her mother, attended small gatherings appropriate for someone in half-mourning, and pretended everything was fine. At night, she pored over account books and unpaid bills, trying to make numbers add up when they simply wouldn't. They'd had to let 2 more servants go. Eleanor had been the one to tell them, seeing the fear in their eyes, knowing they had families depending on them. She'd written letters of recommendation with a steady hand while her stomach churned. The butcher had stopped extending credit. The coal merchant wanted payment in advance. Her mother had quietly sold a silver tea service Eleanor hadn't realized was worth anything. They were bleeding out slowly, and no amount of polite conversation or careful appearances could stop it. You look tired, Beatrice said one afternoon, finding Eleanor in their father's study. Her study now, she supposed, though she couldn't bring herself to think of it that way. I'm fine. You're lying. Beatrice perched on the edge of the desk. You're always in here now looking at those horrible books? It's making you miserable. Someone has to look at them. Why you? Why not Mama? Eleanor glanced up at her sister, so young still, so sheltered from the worst of it. Because Mama's already caring enough. She doesn't need to know exactly how bad things are. But you do? Someone does, Eleanor repeated. She closed the ledger she'd been studying, more bad news, always more bad news, and rubbed her eyes. The dinner party is in 3 days. Are you nervous? Should I be? Beatrice tilted her head, considering. Caroline Ashworth says the Duke is terribly handsome, but hasn't smiled once since returning to London. She saw him at the theater last week and said he barely spoke to anyone, just sat in his box looking bored. How encouraging, Eleanor said dryly. She also said half of the mamas in London are throwing their daughters at him, and he's rejected every single one. Not rudely, mind you, just completely indifferently, as if they don't even register as human beings. Eleanor thought of the shop, of that dismissive glance. Yes, that sounds about right. So how are you going to make him notice you? It was the question Eleanor had been avoiding for weeks. How did you make an impression on someone who seemed to find the entire world beneath his notice? I have absolutely no idea, she admitted. Beatrice was quiet for a moment, then said, Maybe you should just be yourself. Myself got me nowhere at our first meeting. Well, maybe that's because you went in with prejudices already formed. You decided he was awful before you even spoke to him. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Was that true? She'd certainly heard enough negative reports about the Duke before meeting him. Had she been looking for confirmation of those reports rather than forming her own opinion? No, she'd been perfectly fair. He'd been the one who was cold and dismissive, hadn't he? I'll be charming, Eleanor said finally. I'll smile and nod and agree with whatever he says. I'll be the perfect potential duchess. You'll be miserable, Beatrice predicted. Yes, well, Eleanor returned her attention to the ledgers. Misery might be a luxury we can't afford anymore. The night of the dinner party arrived with unseasonable warmth. Eleanor dressed carefully in a deep blue silk, not quite out of mourning, but dark enough to be respectful, and let Jenny arrange her hair in a style that was elegant without being too elaborate. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had she started looking so serious, so drawn? You look beautiful, miss, Jenny said softly. I look desperate, Eleanor corrected, but she managed a smile. Thank you, Jenny. That will be all. The Blackthorn townhouse was magnificent, all soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire annual income. She felt small walking into it, acutely aware of the difference between this kind of wealth and her own family's fading gentility. The Duchess greeted them warmly, introducing them to the other guests, Lord and Lady Pemberton, the Ashworth family, Sir Richard and Lady Caldwell, and a few others Eleanor recognized from various social functions. A small party, perhaps 15 people in all. And standing by the fireplace, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, was Duke Adrian Blackthorn. He'd cleaned up nicely since their encounter at the shop, Eleanor had to admit. His evening clothes fit him perfectly, emphasizing his broad shoulders and tall frame. His hair was properly styled, though one dark lock still fell across his forehead in a way that made her fingers itch to push it back. She crushed that thought immediately. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment Eleanor forgot to breathe. Then he nodded, that same bare acknowledgement from before, and turned back to his conversation with Lord Pemberton. Right. Of course. Dinner was an exercise in elegant torture. Eleanor found herself seated between Sir Richard, who spent the entire meal discussing his horse-breeding venture in excruciating detail, and young Thomas Ashworth, who was sweet but painfully shy and barely said 3 words. The Duke sat at the head of the table, his mother at the foot, and Eleanor was perfectly positioned to observe him throughout the meal without appearing to stare. He was polite. Impeccably so. He responded when spoken to, made appropriate remarks about the food and wine, asked intelligent questions of his dinner partners. But there was something missing, some spark of genuine engagement that would have transformed politeness into actual conversation. He reminded her of a clockwork automaton she'd seen once at a fair, perfectly constructed, functioning exactly as designed, but utterly lifeless. What do you think, Miss Whitmore? Eleanor jerked her attention back to find everyone looking at her expectantly. Heat flooded her face. I'm sorry, I was wool gathering. What was the question? Lady Ashworth smiled kindly. We were discussing the new exhibition at the Royal Academy. Have you had a chance to visit? Not yet, I'm afraid. Mourning restrictions? She trailed off, hating how she sounded, using her father's death as an excuse. Of course, my dear. Though I believe the half-mourning period allows for such cultural outings, perhaps you might join our party next week. It was kindly meant, but Eleanor saw the calculation behind it. Lady Ashworth had 3 daughters and no sons. She was already assessing Eleanor as competition or potential ally. That's very generous, Eleanor said, falling back on trained courtesy. I'll have to check with my mother. The Academy is rather overrated this year, the Duke said suddenly. His voice cut through the conversation like a knife. Half the paintings look like they were completed by children given too much sugar. An uncomfortable silence fell. Lady Ashworth's smile froze. Her husband cleared his throat. Well, art is rather subjective, isn't it? Someone ventured. No, the Duke said flatly. Art either demonstrates technical skill or it doesn't. The current fashion for emotional expression over precision is simply laziness disguised as innovation. Eleanor felt something snap inside her. Maybe it was the weeks of stress. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was just the sheer arrogance of this man dismissing an entire exhibition he clearly hadn't even seen properly. How strange, she heard herself say, voice sweet as honey. I would have thought emotion was precisely what separated art from mere technical exercise. A perfectly executed painting that conveys nothing is just, well, it's just paint on canvas, isn't it? Every head swiveled toward her. The Duke's gray eyes fixed on her with sudden, complete attention. You disagree with my assessment, Miss Whitmore. I disagree with your premise, Your Grace. Technical skill without emotion is sterile. Would you prefer a world where every painting was perfectly rendered but utterly devoid of feeling? His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I would prefer a world where artists mastered their craft before inflicting their feelings on the public. How fortunate, then, that the public is free to choose what they value. Some of us appreciate passion as much as precision. The silence stretched. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. What was she doing? This was supposed to be her chance to charm him, and instead she was arguing with him in front of his mother and all his guests. Then the Duke's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something close. An interesting perspective. Though I notice you haven't actually seen the exhibition you're defending, and I notice you're dismissing it based on, what? A quick walkthrough? A review in the paper? How can you judge the emotion in something you haven't properly examined? I've seen enough mediocrity to recognize it on sight. Or perhaps you've closed yourself off to the possibility of being moved by something, and so you dismiss it as mediocrity rather than admit you might be capable of feeling. The words were out before Eleanor could stop them. And the moment they hit the air, she wanted to die. Too far. That was way too far. The Duke went very still. Around them, the other guests seemed to be holding their collective breath. I beg your pardon, Eleanor stammered. That was inappropriate. No. He cut her off, his voice quiet, but absolute. Don't apologize for speaking your mind, Miss Whitmore. It's refreshingly honest. He lifted his wine glass in a small salute that somehow felt like mockery. Even if it's completely wrong. The conversation moved on, blessedly, to safer topics. But Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of the Duke's eyes on her for the rest of the meal, assessing, calculating, trying to figure out what to make of her. She'd spectacularly failed at being charming. Instead, she'd been argumentative and rude, and had probably ensured he'd never look at her as anything but an annoyance. Her mother was going to kill her. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room while the men remained for port and cigars. Eleanor's mother cornered her immediately. What were you thinking? She hissed. Arguing with him like that. I know. I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. You're supposed to be winning him over, not debating him. I know, Eleanor repeated miserably. I'll apologize when the gentlemen join us. But when the men did rejoin them 20 minutes later, the Duke made no move to approach her. He spent his time circulating among the guests with the same polite disinterest he'd shown at dinner, and Eleanor found herself standing by the window, watching him and wondering what it must be like to move through the world so completely armored against it. He likes you, you know. Eleanor spun to find the Duchess beside her, smiling gently. I doubt that very much, Your Grace. I was terribly rude at dinner. You challenged him. No one ever challenges him anymore. The Duchess sighed, following Eleanor's gaze to where her son stood speaking with Lord Pemberton. He wasn't always like this. Cold, I mean. There was a time when Adrian laughed easily, when he cared about things. But the last few years, she trailed off, something sad crossing her face. What happened? Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. The Duchess shook her head. That's his story to tell, if he chooses, but I thought you should know. What you see isn't all there is. He's built walls, yes, but walls can be climbed. Or sometimes, if you're patient enough, doors open. Before Eleanor could respond, the Duchess moved away, leaving her more confused than ever. The evening wound down. Guests began making their departures, and Eleanor found herself swept along with her family toward the entrance hall. She hadn't spoken to the Duke again, and part of her was relieved. She'd made enough of a disaster for one evening. But as they waited for their carriage, she felt a presence at her elbow. She turned to find the Duke standing there, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. "Miss Whitmore, a word, if you would." Her mother and Beatrice suddenly found something fascinating to look at across the hall, giving them the illusion of privacy. "Your Grace," Eleanor managed, throat dry. "I wanted to, that is—" He paused, and for the first time she saw something like uncertainty cross his features. It was there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Your points at dinner, about emotion in art, they were not entirely without merit. Was that an apology, or as close as the Duke of Blackthorn came to one?" "Thank you," Eleanor said cautiously, "though I shouldn't have expressed them so forcefully. It was rude of me. It was honest." He looked at her directly, and Eleanor felt the full force of that gray gaze like a physical weight. "I find I prefer honesty to the usual simpering agreement I receive." "I don't simper," Eleanor said before her brain could engage. The corner of his mouth twitched. "No, you don't." He glanced away toward the window where rain had started falling again. "There's a lecture at the Royal Society next week regarding recent astronomical discoveries. I thought, if you and your family were interested, I could arrange attendance." Eleanor's mind went blank. Was he asking to see her again? "That's very kind, Your Grace." "It's not kindness." His voice was flat again, walls back up. "I simply thought you might find it interesting. You seem like someone who appreciates intellectual discourse." It should have been a compliment. Somehow it felt like he was checking a box. Intelligent woman, likes arguing, probably enjoys science lectures. Noted. "I would love to attend," Eleanor heard herself say. "Thank you." He nodded once, that same curt nod, and stepped back. "I'll send details to your mother. Good evening, Miss Whitmore." "Good evening, Your Grace." She watched him walk away ramrod straight, perfectly controlled, and felt the strangest urge to throw something at his head just to see if he'd react. In the carriage ride home, her mother was effusive. "An invitation to the Royal Society. Eleanor, this is wonderful. He's clearly interested." "He's clearly being polite," Eleanor corrected. "He probably invites everyone to boring lectures." "Don't be contrary. This is exactly what we hoped for." But as Eleanor stared out at the rain-soaked streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something far more complicated than a simple lecture. The Duke was a puzzle she didn't understand, all sharp edges and locked doors. And despite her better judgment, she wanted to understand him. Wanted to know what had turned a man who apparently once laughed easily into this cold, controlled stranger. Wanted to find out if the Duchess was right, if there was something more beneath the ice, and that wanting, Eleanor suspected, was going to be far more dangerous than anything else. The lecture at the Royal Society turned out to be exactly as dry as Eleanor had feared and somehow worse than she'd imagined. A wizened professor with a voice like gravel droned on about celestial mechanics while Eleanor fought to keep her eyes open. She'd positioned herself in the third row beside her mother, directly in the Duke's line of sight, and the pressure to appear fascinated was exhausting. Across the aisle, Adrian Blackthorn sat with perfect posture, his face a mask of polite attention. He hadn't looked at her once since they'd arrived. "The precession of the equinoxes," the professor intoned, "demonstrates the gradual shift in the orientation of Earth's axis of rotation." Eleanor's mind wandered. The rent on the townhouse was due in 2 weeks. They didn't have it. She'd spent the last 3 nights running numbers, trying to find money that simply didn't exist. The silver tea service her mother had sold had bought them time, nothing more. She needed this to work. Needed the Duke to be interested, needed him to offer marriage so she could save her family from complete ruin. The thought made her stomach turn. Miss Whitmore seems less than enthralled. Eleanor jerked her head up to find the Duke had somehow materialized beside her during the brief intermission. Her mother had wandered off to speak with Lady Pemberton, leaving Eleanor momentarily alone. "I'm finding it very educational," she lied. "You were falling asleep." "I was resting my eyes." "You were drooling slightly." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "I was not—" She stopped, seeing the faint glimmer of something in his eyes. "Amusement?" You're teasing me. Merely observing. He settled into the seat her mother had vacated, and Eleanor became acutely aware of how close he was. He smelled like sandalwood and something crisp she couldn't identify. I apologize. The lecture is quite tedious. Then why invite me? Because you struck me as someone who might appreciate learning, even when the delivery is less than inspiring. Was I wrong? Eleanor studied him, trying to read past that carefully neutral expression. You weren't wrong. I do love learning, but this... She gestured at the podium where the professor was setting up glass slides. This feels like punishment disguised as education. An apt description. He was quiet for a moment, then added, There's a better lecture next month. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell is speaking on medical advances. She's actually engaging. You're already planning the next boring outing before this one is finished? I prefer to think ahead. You prefer to control everything, Eleanor corrected, then immediately regretted it. There she went again, speaking without thinking. But the Duke didn't look offended. If anything, that almost amusement deepened. Yes, he admitted, I do. Is that a problem? Only if you expect everyone around you to be equally controlled. I don't expect anything from anyone, Miss Whitmore. I found it's the only way to avoid disappointment. The words were casual, but something in his tone caught her attention. Something bitter beneath the smooth surface. That sounds lonely, she said quietly. His expression shuddered immediately. The lecture is resuming. We should pay attention. He stood, returning to his own seat, and Eleanor felt the dismissal like a door slamming. She'd gotten too close to something real, and he'd retreated behind his walls faster than she could blink. The rest of the lecture passed in a fog. Eleanor tried to focus, tried to care about orbital mechanics and stellar distances, but her mind kept returning to the Duke's face when she'd called him lonely, the way he'd flinched just slightly before locking everything down. What had happened to him? What had turned him into this fortress of a man? Afterward, as they gathered in the society's reception hall for refreshments, Eleanor found herself watching him work the room. He moved through conversations like a chess player executing predetermined moves. Smile here, nod there, appropriate comment, graceful exit. Everything calculated, nothing spontaneous. He's quite something, isn't he? Eleanor turned to find a young woman beside her, maybe a year or two younger, with auburn hair and sharp green eyes. She looked vaguely familiar. I'm sorry, have we met? Catherine Hartwell. My brother is Lord Densworth, the idiot who called the Duke calculating, if you recall. Catherine's smile was wry. He wasn't wrong, mind you. Adrian is calculating, but then most of us would be too if we'd been through what he has. Eleanor's curiosity sparked. What did he go through? Catherine's expression turned sympathetic. You really don't know. I suppose it makes sense. It all happened while he was abroad and the family kept it quiet. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. His younger brother died. Thomas. Barely 20 years old. Riding accident, they said, though there were rumors it was more complicated than that. The world seemed to tilt slightly. A brother. Dead. When? Eleanor managed. 3 years ago, right before Adrian left for the continent. Some people said he fled. Others said he was conducting business. But my brother, for all his faults, was friends with Thomas. He said Adrian blamed himself. Something about an argument they'd had, some falling out. And then Thomas was gone, and Adrian... Catherine shrugged. Well, you see what he became. Eleanor did see. Suddenly, horribly, she saw. The walls, the control, the careful distance from anything resembling emotion. This wasn't arrogance. This was armor. Thank you for telling me, Eleanor said softly. Just thought you should know. Catherine tilted her head toward where the Duke stood, listening to Lord Pemberton with that same polite blankness. Everyone thinks he's cold. Maybe he is, but maybe he just can't afford to be warm anymore. The rest of the evening passed in a strange haze. Eleanor went through the motions, smiling, conversing, accepting the Duke's offer to escort her family home in his carriage. But her mind was spinning, rearranging everything she thought she knew about Adrian Blackthorne. In the carriage, her mother chattered away about the lecture while Beatrice dozed against the window. The Duke sat across from Eleanor, staring out at the darkened streets, his face unreadable. Your Grace, Eleanor ventured, may I ask you something? His eyes shifted to her. Of course. Why did you really invite me today? And please don't say it's because I appreciate intellectual discourse. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, you're different from the others. The ones who simper and agree and pretend to be whatever they think I want. You argued with me about art. You fell asleep during a lecture I invited you to. You called me lonely to my face. He paused. It's refreshing. Uncomfortable, but refreshing. I'm sorry about your brother, Eleanor blurted out. The temperature in the carriage dropped 10 degrees. The Duke went absolutely still. Who told you? Does it matter? Yes. Eleanor lifted her chin. Catherine Hartwell. She thought I should know. She had no right. His voice was ice. And you have no right to pity me. I don't pity you. I'm simply... Don't. The single word cut like a blade. Whatever you think you understand about me, Miss Whitmore, you don't. And I would appreciate it if you didn't presume to. The carriage pulled up to the Whitmore townhouse, and Eleanor's mother woke Beatrice with gentle shakes. The Duke didn't move, didn't offer to help them down, just sat frozen in his corner like a statue. Eleanor climbed out, then turned back. For what it's worth, Your Grace, I think your brother would hate what you've become. She slammed the carriage door before he could respond, but not before she saw his face, stark white, eyes wide with something that looked like devastation. Her mother grabbed her arm as the carriage pulled away. Eleanor, what were you thinking? You can't speak to him that way. Why not? Everyone else is too afraid to tell him the truth. The truth about what? That hiding from grief doesn't make it hurt less. It just makes you half alive. Eleanor brushed past her mother and sister, into the house, up to her room. She locked the door and pressed her back against it, breathing hard. What had she done? She just destroyed any chance of securing the Duke's interest. More than that, she'd been cruel. Deliberately cruel, throwing his brother's death in his face like a weapon. But the look on his face when she'd mentioned Thomas, the absolute devastation before the walls slammed down, that was real, that was human, that was the man hiding beneath all that ice. Eleanor changed for bed mechanically, her mind replaying the evening over and over. The Duke's admission that she was different. His immediate retreat when she'd offered sympathy. The way he'd looked when she'd mentioned his brother, like she'd struck him. She should apologize. She should write a letter, grovel, beg his forgiveness. But a stubborn part of her refused. He needed to hear it, needed someone to crack that armor, even if it hurt, even if it cost her everything. She just hoped she hadn't made things irreparably worse. The answer came 3 days later in the form of a letter delivered by the Duke's footman. Eleanor's hands shook as she broke the seal. Miss Whitmore, your words the other evening were inappropriate and presumptuous. They were also not entirely inaccurate. I find I cannot decide whether to thank you or never speak to you again. There is a gallery exhibition opening next week, the same one I so thoroughly dismissed at dinner. I thought you might enjoy attending so you can see firsthand how wrong my assessment was. Yours, Blackthorn. Eleanor read it 3 times, trying to parse the tone. Was this an apology? An olive branch? Or was he calling her bluff, daring her to defend the exhibition she'd championed without having seen it? Probably all 3, knowing him. What does it say? Beatrice demanded, appearing at her elbow. He's invited me to an art exhibition. That's wonderful. Isn't it wonderful, Mama? Their mother looked up from her correspondence, face lined with worry. I suppose. Though Eleanor did insult him rather spectacularly, I'm surprised he's still speaking to her at all. Maybe he likes being insulted, Beatrice suggested. Maybe everyone's always so nice to him that it's boring. Eleanor thought of the Duke's words in the carriage. You're different from the others. Maybe Beatrice was right. Maybe Adrian Blackthorn had spent so long being agreed with, deferred to, treated like some untouchable deity, that honest criticism felt like fresh air. Or maybe she was rationalizing her own terrible behavior. Either way, she had to go, had to see him again, had to prove to herself and to him that she could be civil, that she could navigate this strange dance they'd stumbled into. I'll need a new dress, she said. Her mother's expression turned pained. Eleanor, I know we can't afford it, but if this is going to work, if he's going to consider me seriously, I can't keep wearing the same 3 gowns. People will talk. The silence stretched thin. Finally, her mother nodded. I'll speak to Madame Dubois. Perhaps she'll extend credit one more time. The guilt was immediate and crushing, but Eleanor pushed it down. This was for all of them. For Beatrice's future, for keeping the roof over their heads. She just had to make the Duke fall in love with her. Simple. The gallery exhibition was nothing like Eleanor expected. Instead of the stuffy, formal viewing she'd imagined, the event was crowded and noisy, full of artists and critics and society figures all crammed together arguing about brushstrokes and composition. Eleanor wore her new dress, a deep emerald that had cost far too much, and tried not to think about the bill waiting at home. The Duke met her at the entrance, impeccably dressed as always, his expression giving away absolutely nothing. "Miss Whitmore, thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. I hope I can prove you wrong about the exhibition's merit." "I hope so too. I'd hate to think I wasted an entire evening being unnecessarily cruel about it." Was that self-awareness? From the Duke of Ice? They moved through the gallery slowly, stopping at each painting. Some were beautiful, some were bizarre. One appeared to be nothing more than random splashes of color, which Eleanor privately thought looked like someone had knocked over several paint pots and called it art. "Well?" the Duke asked, stopping before a particularly abstract piece. "Emotion or technical skill?" Eleanor studied the canvas, harsh slashes of red and black, chaotic and violent. It made her uncomfortable to look at, which she suspected was the point. "Both," she said finally. "The technique is there in the way the colors blend, the way the composition draws your eye. But the emotion is what makes it memorable. It feels angry, desperate." "It feels like a mess," the Duke countered. "Maybe, but a meaningful mess." "There's no such thing. Mess is just chaos pretending to have purpose." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Is that what you think about grief too? That it's just chaos that should be controlled and tidied away?" His jaw tightened. "I thought we were discussing art." "We are. Art, grief, life. It's all connected, isn't it? The messiness, the chaos, the things we can't control no matter how hard we try. Some of us prefer order, Miss Whitmore. Some of us hide behind order because feeling things is too frightening." They stared at each other, the conversation around them fading into background noise. Eleanor's heart hammered. She'd done it again, pushed too hard, said too much. But the Duke didn't walk away. Instead, he said quietly, "Come with me." He led her through the crowded gallery to a quieter room in the back, less populated. Here, the paintings were smaller, more intimate. He stopped before one that showed a young man on horseback, laughing, wind in his hair. Eleanor's breath caught. The style was different from the artist's other work, looser, more personal. And the subject, "Your brother," she said softly. The Duke nodded, not looking at her. Thomas commissioned this the month before he died. The artist was a friend of his. After the accident, she gave it to my mother. His voice was carefully controlled, each word precisely measured. I hadn't seen it until today. Eleanor looked at this painting, at the joy captured there, and felt her throat tighten. "He looks happy." He was. Always. Even when he had no reason to be. Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. "We argued the day before he died. About something stupid, I can't even remember what. And I was cold to him, dismissed him. The last thing I ever said to my brother was, 'Stop being so childish.'" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with old pain. "That's not your fault," Eleanor said. "Isn't it? If I'd been kinder, if I'd listened, maybe he wouldn't have ridden out that day. Maybe he wouldn't have been so reckless." "You can't know that. You can't carry the weight of every possible outcome." "Then what should I carry, Miss Whitmore? What am I supposed to do with all this?" He stopped, breathing hard, and Eleanor realized she was seeing him truly vulnerable for the first time. The mask had cracked, and beneath it was nothing but raw grief. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "You're supposed to feel it," she said quietly. "The grief, the guilt, the anger, all of it. You feel it, and you survive it, and eventually it becomes something you can live with instead of something that's killing you." "You sound like you speak from experience." "My father. I was angry at him for so long. For the debts, the lies, the mess he left us in. And then he died, and I couldn't be angry anymore because he was gone. But the anger didn't go away, it just mixed with the grief until I couldn't tell them apart." Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. How do you manage it? Badly, most days. But I'm trying. That's all we can do, isn't it? Try to survive each day until surviving becomes living again. They stood there in the quiet gallery, hands clasped, looking at the painting of a young man who would never grow old. Around them, the exhibition continued, but here in this small room, it felt like they existed in a bubble outside time. I'm sorry, Adrian said finally, for being so cold, so controlled. It's easier than... I know, Eleanor interrupted gently. I know. He squeezed her hand once, then released it. The mask began to slide back into place, but not completely. Something had changed. Some wall had been breached. We should return to the main gallery, he said. People will talk if we're gone too long. Let them talk. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Spoken like someone who doesn't have a reputation to maintain. Spoken like someone who's tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not. They made their way back to the crowded rooms, but something was different now. The Duke stood closer to her, his arm occasionally brushing hers as they moved through the crowd. When Lord Pemberton made a pompous comment about one painting's lack of classical training, Adrian caught Eleanor's eye, and she saw humor there, genuine, warm humor. It was like watching ice begin to thaw. The evening ended too quickly. As Adrian escorted Eleanor to her carriage, he said, "Would you walk with me tomorrow? In the park?" "I'd like that." "Bring a chaperone if you must, but I'd prefer just you." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "Your Grace, that's rather scandalous." "Yes, well, you seem to bring out my scandalous side, Miss Whitmore." She laughed, actually laughed, and saw answering warmth in his eyes. "Tomorrow then, 10 o'clock? I'll count the hours." It should have sounded mocking. Instead, it sounded sincere. Eleanor floated home on a cloud of hope. Perhaps this could work. Perhaps beneath all that ice was someone worth knowing, worth loving even. But when she arrived home, she found her mother in the drawing room, face pale, hands shaking. "Mama, what's wrong?" Her mother looked up, eyes red from crying. "The bank called in Father's loan, all of it. They want payment in full by the end of the month, or they'll seize the house." The world tilted. "How much?" £5,000. £5,000. An impossible sum. They didn't have 500, let alone 5,000. "There has to be something we can do, some way to negotiate." "I tried. They refused." Her mother's voice broke. "We're ruined, Eleanor, completely ruined. We have 4 weeks to find £5,000, or we lose everything." Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind racing. 4 weeks. The Duke had just begun to open up to her, just begun to see her as someone worth knowing. But 4 weeks wasn't enough time for a courtship, wasn't enough time to secure a proposal. Unless she accelerated things, unless she pushed harder, faster, unless she did something desperate. "I'll fix this," Eleanor heard herself say. "I'll find a way." "How, Eleanor? There's no way. We're finished." But Eleanor was already standing, already planning. She'd won some ground with Adrian tonight. She'd seen behind his walls. Now she just had to press that advantage, make him need her, make him want her enough to propose quickly. It was manipulative. It was calculating. It was exactly what she had to do. "Trust me, Mama. I'll handle it." Her mother looked at her with such desperate hope that Eleanor felt sick, but she couldn't afford weakness. Not now. Not when everything was falling apart. She would make Adrian Blackthorne fall in love with her in 4 weeks. She had no other choice. The walk in the park the next morning felt different. Wrong, somehow. Eleanor kept her smile fixed as Adrian guided her along the serpentine path, away from the more crowded areas where chaperones and gossips congregated. She should have felt victorious. Here she was, alone with the Duke, his walls crumbling, everything going according to plan. Instead, she felt like a fraud. "You're quiet today," Adrian observed. He'd dressed less formally than usual, his cravat loosely tied, and it made him look younger, more approachable. "I thought after last night you'd have opinions about every tree and flower we pass." Eleanor forced a laugh. "I'm simply enjoying the morning. It's peaceful." Peaceful. He said the word like he was testing it. I'd forgotten what that feels like. They walked in silence for a few moments, and Eleanor's mind raced. 4 weeks. She had 4 weeks to secure a proposal, or her family would be destroyed. The knowledge sat in her stomach like lead. "Adrian," she said, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. Your Grace, Adrian is fine when we're alone." He glanced at her, something uncertain in his expression. "Unless you'd prefer formality." "No. No, I prefer Adrian." The intimacy of his name on her tongue felt dangerous, like she was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "Good." They'd reached a small clearing with a bench overlooking the pond. "Shall we sit?" Eleanor settled onto the bench, arranging her skirts carefully, buying herself time to think. Adrian sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not touching. Always so careful about propriety, even as he bent the rules. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for last night, for what you said about grief, about feeling it instead of controlling it. No one's ever spoken to me that way before." "Maybe they should have." "Maybe." He turned to look at her fully. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Eleanor. You see through all the pretense, all the walls I've built. It's terrifying and remarkable." Her heart twisted. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? Him opening up, seeing her as someone special, but hearing it now, knowing what drove her actions, made her feel sick. "I'm not that remarkable," she said, voice strained. "I'm just honest, sometimes too honest. No such thing." His hand moved toward hers, hovering for a moment before he took it. His fingers were warm, slightly rough. "I've spent 3 years surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me what I need to hear. There's a difference." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands and felt something crack inside her chest. She should pull away. Should stop this before it went any further. But she couldn't afford to stop. Couldn't afford honesty, not when dishonesty was the only thing that might save them. "What happened after your brother died?" she asked instead. "Why did you leave London?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I couldn't stand the sympathy. Everyone looking at me with pity, whispering about the tragedy, treating me like I might shatter. And the guilt." He stopped, swallowed hard. "The guilt was eating me alive. So I ran. Spent 3 years in Italy, France, anywhere that wasn't here. Anywhere I didn't have to see his empty seat at dinner, or pass his room, or remember. Did it help? No. The grief followed me everywhere. I just learned to lock it away deeper." He looked at her, and Eleanor saw raw vulnerability in his eyes. Until you forced me to actually feel it again." "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered and meant it. "Don't be. I think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think maybe I needed to feel it, to stop running. You made me see that." The guilt was overwhelming now. Here was this man, broken and grieving, trusting her with his pain, and she was using it. Using him, calculating how to turn his vulnerability into a proposal, his opening heart into financial salvation for her family. She was exactly as cold as she'd once accused him of being. "Eleanor." Adrian shifted closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But I feel something with you that I haven't felt in years. Something real." No, this was happening too quickly, before she was ready, before she'd figured out how to live with what she was doing. "Adrian, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know, wanted you to understand that you've changed something in me. For the better, I think." Eleanor's eyes burned. She blinked hard, fighting back tears she had no right to shed. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave and honest, and you don't let anyone, including me, hide from the truth." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I know that when I'm with you, I feel less alone." She should say something, should respond, but her throat was closed, choked with guilt and longing, and the horrible awareness that she was going to destroy whatever this fragile thing between them was. Because she had to, because 4 weeks wasn't enough time for honest courtship, but it might be enough time for calculated seduction. For making him need her so badly he'd propose out of desperation rather than love. "I should go," Eleanor managed, pulling back. "My mother will worry." Adrian's hand fell away, confusion crossing his features. "Did I say something wrong?" No, you said everything right. That's the problem." She stood, smoothing her skirts with shaking hands. Adrian rose too, catching her wrist gently. "Eleanor, what's wrong? Talk to me." "I can't." The words came out broken. I need time to think about all of this." "Then think. Take all the time you need." His grip was gentle but firm. "But don't run from me, please. I've had enough people run." The plea in his voice nearly undid her. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and hurried away before she could do something stupid like tell him the truth. Tell him that her family was ruined and she was using him and she didn't deserve his trust or his vulnerability or anything else he was offering. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't turn back. The next 2 weeks were torture. Eleanor threw herself into the pursuit of Adrian Blackthorne with single-minded determination that made her hate herself a little more each day. She accepted every invitation, attended every event where he might appear, positioned herself in his line of sight, and laughed at the right moments, and touched his arm and played the role of interested suitor with devastating precision. And Adrian responded exactly as she'd hoped. He sought her out at balls, claimed her dances, sent flowers and notes and invitations. The tone began to whisper about the Duke of Blackthorne's sudden courtship of Miss Whitmore, and her mother's relief was palpable. "You're doing wonderfully," her mother said one afternoon, helping Eleanor dress for yet another garden party. "He's clearly smitten. I wouldn't be surprised if he proposed within the month." Within the month. 2 weeks left before the bank foreclosed. Eleanor needed him to propose in 2 weeks. "Mama," Eleanor said carefully, "how much would you hate me if I encouraged things along? Made sure he proposed sooner rather than later?" Her mother's hand stilled on the buttons of Eleanor's dress. "What do you mean?" "I mean being alone with him, compromising myself slightly. Nothing truly scandalous, but enough that he'd feel obligated to offer marriage." The silence stretched. Finally, her mother said quietly, "I would hate that you felt you had to, but I would understand why." Eleanor closed her eyes. "I'm running out of options." "I know, darling, I know." Her mother's voice was thick with unshed tears. "Your father would be so ashamed of what I've driven you to." "It's not your fault." "Isn't it? I should have seen the debts mounting, should have stopped him, should have—" She broke off. "But I didn't, and now you're paying the price." Eleanor turned, taking her mother's hands. "We're all paying the price. I'm just trying to make sure we survive it." That evening's garden party was at the Hartwell estate, and Eleanor arrived with a plan she'd spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. She would get Adrian alone, properly alone, in circumstances that could be witnessed but not interrupted. She would let things progress just far enough that gossip would demand he do the honorable thing. It was calculated. It was manipulative. It was the only way. She found Adrian by the rose garden, looking uncomfortable in a group of simpering debutantes. When he saw Eleanor, relief flooded his face. "Miss Whitmore? What perfect timing. I was just telling Miss Ashworth and her companions about my travels in Italy, but I fear I'm boring them terribly." "Not at all, Your Grace," Miss Ashworth simpered. "It's absolutely fascinating." Eleanor caught Adrian's eye and saw the plea there. She almost laughed. The Duke of Blackthorne, terrified of a group of young women. "Actually, Your Grace, I was hoping you might show me the library Lord Hartwell mentioned. He said the collection is extraordinary." Adrian seized the escape route. "Of course. Ladies, if you'll excuse us." They left behind a wake of disappointed sighs. Once out of earshot, Adrian said, "Thank you. I thought I might actually perish from forced pleasantries." "You're terrible at small talk," Eleanor observed. "I prefer meaningful conversation to meaningless chatter." "Is that a crime?" "In society? Absolutely." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. Eleanor's heart clenched. This was the man beneath the ice, the one who could be happy if he'd let himself, and she was about to use him in the worst possible way. The library was in a separate wing of the house, quieter and less populated, perfect for Eleanor's purposes. They stepped inside and she closed the door behind them, not all the way, but enough to suggest privacy. "Are you actually interested in books, or was that just a rescue mission?" Adrian asked, running his fingers along a shelf. "Both." Eleanor moved deeper into the room, away from the door. "Though I confess I had ulterior motives." He turned, eyebrow raised. "Oh? I wanted you alone, without an audience, without performance." She was improvising now, letting a version of the truth guide her lies. These past 2 weeks have been wonderful, but every conversation we've had has been in public, carefully monitored. I wanted just us. Adrian's expression softened. I wanted that too. But Eleanor, we shouldn't be alone like this. If someone saw, I know. She stepped closer. I don't care. That wasn't entirely true. She cared very much. She was counting on someone seeing, on gossip spreading, on social pressure forcing his hand. But Adrian didn't need to know that. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. You're playing with fire. Maybe I want to burn. It was a terrible line, something from a bad novel, but it worked. Adrian kissed her, and Eleanor kissed him back, and for a moment she forgot why she was doing this. Forgot the debts, and the desperation, and the lies. For one perfect moment, she was just a woman being kissed by a man she was rapidly falling for. Then she heard footsteps in the hall and remembered. She pulled back slightly, breathless. Someone's coming, Adrian swore softly, stepping away just as the door opened wider. Lady Hartwell stood there, eyes widening as she took in the scene, Eleanor disheveled, Adrian flushed, both of them clearly having been closer than propriety allowed. Oh, Lady Hartwell said. Oh my. Eleanor felt sick. This was what she'd wanted, a witness, scandal, pressure. But seeing the calculation in Lady Hartwell's eyes, the eager gleam that meant gossip would be spread within the hour, made her want to vomit. Lady Hartwell, Adrian said smoothly, Miss Whitmore and I were just discussing the collection. She has a particular interest in Italian literature. I'm sure she does, Lady Hartwell said, her tone suggesting she believed nothing of the sort. Though perhaps such discussions should take place in more public areas of the house? Of course, Eleanor managed. How thoughtless of me. We'll return to the party immediately. But as they filed out, Eleanor saw Lady Hartwell's expression. The damage was done. By tomorrow, all of London would be whispering about the Duke of Blackthorn and Miss Whitmore, caught alone in a library in a compromising position. Adrian would have to propose. Honor would demand it. Eleanor had won. So why did she feel like she'd lost everything? The next morning, Eleanor woke to chaos. Her mother burst into her room before dawn, waving a scandal sheet. Have you seen this? Have you seen what they're saying? Eleanor sat up, heart pounding. She took the paper with shaking hands and read the headline, Duke of Ice Melts for Mystery. Miss, Improper Library Liaison Shocks Society. The article was worse than she'd imagined. It didn't just hint at impropriety, it outright accused them of scandalous behavior. The writer speculated about secret engagements, elopements, even suggested that Eleanor might have trapped the Duke deliberately. Which Eleanor thought, sickly, wasn't far from the truth. This is terrible, her mother said, pacing. The gossip is one thing, but this makes you look calculated, manipulative. I was calculated, Eleanor whispered. I was manipulative. Her mother stopped. What? I planned it. I got him alone deliberately, knowing someone might see. I wanted the scandal. I wanted him forced to propose. The words tumbled out in a rush. I've been using him, Mama, for weeks. Every conversation, every smile, every moment, it's all been lies to save us. Her mother's face went white. Eleanor, I know how awful that makes me. But I didn't see another choice. We needed the money, needed the security, and he was interested, so I just pushed it along, made him fall faster than he would have naturally. Does he know? No, he thinks, Eleanor's voice broke. He thinks I care about him, that I see past his walls, that I'm helping him heal. And maybe part of me does care, but it started as manipulation, and I don't know where the lies end and the truth begins anymore. Her mother sank onto the bed beside her. What are you going to do? I don't know. If I tell him the truth, he'll never forgive me. We'll be ruined. But if I don't tell him and he finds out later... Eleanor buried her face in her hands. There's no good choice. Then make the least bad one, her mother said quietly. If he proposes, accept. Save us. You can tell him the truth after you're married, when he can't easily leave. Eleanor looked at her mother in horror. You want me to lie to him for the rest of my life? I want you to survive. I want this family to survive. Sometimes survival requires difficult choices. Immoral choices? We're past morality, Eleanor. We're in survival mode. Before Eleanor could respond, there was a knock at the door. Jenny entered, looking nervous. Miss, there's a gentleman caller, the Duke of Blackthorn. He's waiting in the drawing room and says it's urgent. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes. She dressed hastily, her mind racing. He was here. Now. To propose, probably. Doing the honorable thing after the scandal. And she would have to accept and lie and pretend and hate herself for the rest of her life. But when she entered the drawing room, the expression on Adrian's face wasn't what she expected. He looked furious. Tell me it's not true, he said without preamble. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What? The rumors, the whispers I've been hearing all morning. He moved toward her, and she saw the betrayal in his eyes. That you're destitute, that your family is drowning in debt, that you've been pursuing me for my fortune. Who told you that? Does it matter? Is it true? Eleanor's mind went blank. She could lie, should lie. But looking at his face, at the hurt and anger there, she found she couldn't. Yes, she whispered. Adrian flinched like she'd struck him. Yes to which part? All of it. We're in debt, terrible debt. The bank is foreclosing on our house in 2 weeks unless we can pay £5,000. And me? Us? What was I to you? Eleanor's throat closed. At first, a solution, a way to save my family. At first, his voice was dangerously quiet. And later? Later it got complicated. I started to care about you, started to see you as more than just a convenient bank vault. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. How thoughtful of you. Adrian, please, don't. He held up a hand. Don't use my name. Don't pretend we have that kind of familiarity. You've been lying to me from the start. Not lying, just not telling the whole truth. What's the difference? He was shouting now, his careful control shattered. You let me open up to you. You listened to me talk about Thomas, about my grief, about things I've never told anyone, and the whole time you were calculating how to use it against me. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Adrian's eyes blazed. I thought you were different. I thought you actually saw me, not just my title and fortune. I thought for once someone was being honest with me. But you're just like everyone else. Worse, actually, because at least they were obvious about their interest in my money. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please understand. Understand what? That you were desperate? That makes it acceptable to manipulate someone's grief? He turned away, hands clenched. Did you plan the library? The scandal? She couldn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Unbelievable. He spun back to face her. You engineered the whole thing. Made sure we'd be caught. Made sure I'd have to propose to preserve your reputation. That's why you closed the door. Why you kissed me. It was all calculated. Not all of it, Eleanor managed. The kiss? That was real. Was it? Or are you still performing? His voice dropped to something deadly quiet. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to leave. You're going to issue a statement saying our courtship was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by gossip. We will not see each other again socially, and your family's debts are your own problem. Adrian, please, I know I don't deserve your help, but your family should have thought about that before using you as bait. He moved toward the door, then paused. You know what the worst part is? I was falling in love with you. I was starting to think maybe I could be happy again. Turns out I was just being played for a fool. The words hit like physical blows. Eleanor sank into a chair, unable to stand anymore. I never meant to hurt you. Well, you did. Congratulations. You managed to do what 3 years of grief couldn't, make me wish I'd never let anyone in at all. He left without looking back, and Eleanor heard the front door slam with devastating finality. She sat alone in the drawing room, tears streaming down her face, and tried to figure out how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. She'd wanted to save her family. Instead, she'd destroyed the first real connection she'd felt in years and ruined any chance of salvation in the process. Her mother appeared in the doorway, face stricken. Eleanor? He knows everything, and he's not going to help us. The color drained from her mother's face. What are we going to do? Eleanor wiped her eyes and stood on shaking legs. I don't know, but I'll figure something out. I always do. But even as she said it, she knew it was hopeless. 2 weeks until foreclosure, no prospects, no options, no way out. And worst of all, she'd hurt the one person who'd actually seen something in her worth loving. The next few days passed in a nightmare blur. The scandal sheets had a field day with the Duke of Blackthorn's abrupt withdrawal from society. Speculation ran wild. Some said Eleanor had trapped him, others that he'd discovered something shameful about her family. Still others whispered about secret engagements broken and hearts destroyed. Eleanor stopped reading the papers, stopped attending events, stopped pretending everything was fine. She spent her time in her father's study, going through every document, every ledger, looking for something she'd missed, some hidden asset, some forgotten account, some way to scrape together £5,000. There was nothing. On the 10th day, Beatrice found her there, surrounded by papers, looking defeated. Ellie, her sister said quietly, you need to eat something. You need to sleep. I need to save us, Eleanor corrected. And I'm failing. Beatrice sat beside her, picking up one of the ledgers. This isn't your responsibility. You shouldn't have to carry all of this alone. Who else is going to do it? Mother can't. You're too young. It falls to me. And you're drowning. Beatrice's eyes were wet. I'd rather lose the house than lose you to this desperation. Eleanor looked at her sister, sweet, innocent Beatrice, who still believed things would work out somehow, and felt something in her chest crack open. I heard him, she whispered. Adrian, I used him and lied to him, and he was falling in love with me, and I destroyed that for nothing. We're still ruined, and now I've also ruined the first good thing I've had in years. Then fix it. I can't. He hates me. He won't even see me. Then make him see you. Beatrice gripped her hands. Go to him. Tell him the truth, all of it. Not because you want his money, but because you owe him honesty. And maybe, if you're lucky, he'll understand. He won't. Maybe not. But at least you'll have tried. At least you'll know you didn't just give up. Eleanor stared at her sister, seeing wisdom beyond her years. When had Beatrice grown up? When had she become the brave one? What if he turns me away? Then you'll survive it. You'll survive this. We all will. Beatrice smiled sadly. We're Whitmores. We're apparently very good at surviving disasters of our own making. That night, Eleanor sat at her desk and wrote a letter. Not a plea for money, not an apology, just the truth, laid bare in all its ugly honesty. She wrote about the debts, about her father's lies, about the desperation that had driven her to pursue Adrian in the first place, about how she'd planned and calculated and manipulated, and how somewhere along the way it had stopped being performance and started being real. She wrote about falling for him despite herself, about how his grief had echoed her own, how his vulnerability had cracked something open in her chest, about how she'd never meant to hurt him, but had done it anyway because she'd been too cowardly to tell the truth. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness, didn't expect anything at all. She just needed him to know that her feelings, however they'd started, had become genuine, that she was sorry, that he deserved better than what she'd given him. She sealed the letter and sent it before she could change her mind. Then she waited. 3 days passed with no response. The date for the foreclosure crept closer. Eleanor started packing, sorting through what they could take and what would have to be left behind. Her mother moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects with trembling fingers, saying goodbye to the life they'd known. Beatrice tried to stay cheerful, but even her optimism was flagging. On the 13th day, the day before the bank would seize everything, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor answered it herself. Jenny had already been let go, along with the rest of the staff. Adrian Blackthorn stood on her doorstep, looking haggard. His hair was disheveled, his cravat askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. I got your letter, he said. Eleanor's heart stopped. And I don't know what to do with it. He ran a hand through his hair. You lied to me, used me, manipulated my grief. I should hate you. You should, Eleanor agreed quietly. I would hate me too. But I don't. He looked at her, and she saw confusion and pain and something else in his eyes. I've tried. These past 2 weeks I've tried to hate you,
to convince myself you were just another fortune hunter, that nothing between us was real, but I can't make myself believe it. Adrian,
Let me finish. He stepped closer. What you did was wrong, unforgivable even. But I understand why you did it. I've seen what desperation does to people, how it makes us do things we never thought ourselves capable of. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I know, I read it, all 7 pages of sorry. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You're very thorough when you apologize. It's the least I could do. They stood there in her doorway, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Finally, Adrian spoke. The bank debt. £5,000, due tomorrow? Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. I'll pay it. She stared at him. What? I'll pay your family's debt. Clear everything. Give you a fresh start. He held up a hand before she could respond. Not because I'm proposing, not because I'm courting you, because despite everything, I don't want to see you destroyed. Call it foolishness, call it weakness. But I can't stand by and watch you lose everything when I have the means to prevent it. I can't accept that, Eleanor whispered. It's too much. After what I did, you can and you will. Consider it payment for the truth, for actually being honest with me, even when it cost you everything. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Here, bank draft, made out to your creditors. It's done. Eleanor took the envelope with shaking hands. Why? Why would you do this for me? Because despite everything, you're the only person in 3 years who's made me feel anything. Anger, hurt, betrayal, yes. But also joy, hope, possibility. His voice cracked. You brought me back to life, Eleanor. Even if it was built on lies, part of it was real. I know it was. I felt it. It was real, she said desperately. It is real. Adrian, I love you. I know I have no right to say that after everything, but it's true. I fell in love with you somewhere between the arguments and the honesty and watching you start to heal. I love you. He closed his eyes and she saw his jaw clench. Don't. Don't what? Don't say that. Don't make this harder than it already is. Why? What are you saying? Adrian opened his eyes and Eleanor saw devastation there. I'm saying I'm paying your debt because I can't bear to see you suffer. But I can't. I can't be with you. The trust is broken, Eleanor. Every time you'd say you loved me, I'd wonder if you meant it or if you were just saying what you thought I wanted to hear. I can't live like that. I won't. The words cut deeper than anything else could have. Eleanor felt something inside her shatter completely. So this is goodbye, she whispered. This is me giving you what you need while protecting what's left of my heart. He stepped back, creating distance. Use the money well. Build a new life. Be happy. Just do it without me. Adrian, please. But he was already turning away, walking back to his carriage. Eleanor watched him go, clutching the envelope that represented salvation for her family and damnation for her heart. He'd saved them and lost her everything that mattered. The carriage pulled away and Eleanor sank to her knees on the doorstep, finally letting herself break completely. She'd won. She'd gotten exactly what she'd set out to get. Financial security, her family saved, a fresh start. So why did victory taste like ashes? Beatrice found her still on the doorstep an hour later, the envelope clutched in white-knuckled hands, face streaked with tears. Eleanor? Her sister's voice was tentative, worried. What happened? I saw the Duke's carriage. He paid the debt. Eleanor's voice came out hollow. All of it. We're saved. That's wonderful. Why do you look like someone died? Eleanor looked up at her sister and Beatrice's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. Oh, Ellie, he doesn't want me? He paid everything, gave us a fresh start, and then he left. Said he can't trust me. Can't be with someone he'll always wonder about. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. I got exactly what I set out to get, financial security, and it cost me everything that actually matters. Beatrice sat beside her on the cold stone steps, wrapping an arm around Eleanor's shoulders. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You're going to fix this, Beatrice said finally. There's nothing to fix. He made his choice. No, he made the safe choice, the protected choice. But you're Eleanor Whitmore, and you don't accept defeat. Beatrice squeezed her shoulder. You fought for this family when we were drowning. Now fight for yourself. Fight for him. How? He won't even see me. Then make him see you differently. Make him see that you're not just sorry, that you're changed, that you understand what you did wrong, and you're going to spend however long it takes proving you're worth trusting again. Eleanor wiped her eyes, something stirring in her chest. Not hope exactly, but determination. He doesn't want grand gestures. He's had enough of performance. Then don't perform. Be real. Be the person he fell for in the first place, the one who told him the truth even when it hurt. The idea formed slowly, taking shape as Eleanor turned it over in her mind. Not a plea, not an apology. Action. Real, tangible proof that she understood what she'd done wrong and was committed to being better. I need paper, Eleanor said, standing abruptly. Lots of paper. And I need to talk to the creditors, and Madame Dubois, and... She stopped, turning to Beatrice. This is going to be uncomfortable, humiliating even. Good, Beatrice said. If it were easy, it wouldn't mean anything. Eleanor spent the next week doing something she'd never done before, telling the complete, unvarnished truth to everyone who would listen. She started with the creditors, sitting down with each one and explaining her father's deception, the family's financial situation, and how she'd manipulated the Duke. She made no excuses, offered no justifications, just laid out the facts and asked for their understanding going forward. Most were shocked, some were sympathetic, a few were disgusted, but all of them knew the truth now, which meant the whispers and speculation could be replaced with facts. Then she went to Madame Dubois and paid the outstanding dress bill in full, money she'd saved from what the Duke had given them, money they desperately needed for other things. But Eleanor insisted. No more debts. No more obligations hanging over them like swords. Miss Whitmore, Madame Dubois said, counting the notes with obvious relief. I must say I didn't expect this. The rumors are partially true, Eleanor interrupted. My family was in debt. I did pursue the Duke with less than honorable intentions initially, but I'm working to make amends, starting with clearing every obligation we have. Madame Dubois studied her for a long moment. That takes courage, admitting fault. It takes desperation. I've hurt someone I care about. If the only way to prove I've changed is to humble myself publicly, then that's what I'll do. Word spread quickly. Eleanor Whitmore, confessing her family's financial troubles, admitting to her calculated pursuit of the Duke, paying her debts, and asking for nothing in return. The scandal sheets had a field day, but the tone shifted. Instead of malicious speculation, there was grudging respect for her honesty. Lady Hartwell, surprisingly, became an unlikely ally. Eleanor went to her directly, apologizing for the library incident and explaining the circumstances. I'm not asking for your discretion, Eleanor said. I'm simply asking that if you're going to tell the story, you tell all of it, including the parts that make me look terrible. Lady Hartwell's eyebrows rose. Most women in your position would beg me to stay silent. Most women didn't manipulate a grieving man and deserve whatever consequences come from it. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. I'm tired of hiding. If I'm going to rebuild my reputation, it has to be on truth, not more lies. Something shifted in Lady Hartwell's expression. You really do love him, don't you? The Duke. Yes, for all the good it does me now.
He's been miserable, won't attend anything, barely leaves his house. His mother is beside herself. Lady Hartwell paused. Though I suppose you being publicly honest won't change how he feels. No, Eleanor agreed, but it might change how I feel about myself, and that has to be enough.
The Duchess of Blackthorn appeared at Eleanor's door 3 weeks after Adrian had paid the debt. Eleanor had just returned from another round of meetings with tradespeople, paying bills and explaining the situation. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and not prepared for the elegant older woman standing in her drawing room. Your Grace, Eleanor said, dropping into a curtsy. I wasn't expecting... I'm sure you weren't. The Duchess's expression was unreadable. May we speak privately? Eleanor dismissed her mother and Beatrice, who left with obvious reluctance. Once they were alone, the Duchess settled into a chair with practiced grace. I've been hearing interesting things about you, Miss Whitmore, about your campaign of radical honesty. Eleanor's cheeks burned. I'm simply trying to make amends, to be better than I was. By publicly humiliating yourself? By being truthful, finally.
The Duchess was quiet for a moment, studying Eleanor with sharp eyes. My son paid your family's debts. I know. I didn't ask him to. I told him I didn't deserve his help. And yet he helped anyway. Do you know why? Eleanor shook her head. Because despite everything, he loves you. The Duchess's voice was gentle. He's been trying to convince himself otherwise for weeks now, telling himself it was manipulation, that nothing between you was real. But I know my son. I've watched him these past weeks, and I've seen something I haven't seen in 3 years. What's that? Pain. Real, honest pain. The kind you only feel when you've lost something precious. The Duchess leaned forward. When Thomas died, Adrian shut down completely. No tears, no anger, nothing, just ice. But you cracked that ice, made him feel again, and now he's grieving you the way he should have grieved his brother. Eleanor's eyes burned. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything. I want you to do something. The Duchess pulled a card from her reticule. There's a charity gala next month for a foundation Adrian started in Thomas's name, supporting young men's education. He never attends. Can't bear it, I think. But I want you there. Your Grace, he doesn't want to see me. He needs to see you, needs to see what you've become, who you're becoming. The Duchess pressed the invitation into Eleanor's hand. You've spent weeks being publicly honest about your faults. Now be publicly honest about your feelings. Tell him, in front of everyone, exactly what he means to you. No manipulation, no calculation, just truth. And if he still rejects me, then at least you'll know you tried, that you gave him everything you have, with no guarantees. The Duchess stood. Love isn't a business transaction, Miss Whitmore. It's a leap of faith. Are you brave enough to jump? After she left, Eleanor stared at the invitation for a long time. A gala. Public. Everyone who mattered would be there. If Adrian rejected her in front of all of London society, she'd be humiliated beyond recovery. But if she didn't try, she'd spend the rest of her life wondering what if. Do it, Beatrice said from the doorway. Eleanor hadn't heard her come in. Whatever terrifying thing you're considering, do it. You don't even know what it is. I know it involves the Duke. I know it scares you. And I know you're brave enough. Beatrice came to sit beside her. You've spent weeks being brave in small ways, paying debts, admitting fault, facing gossip. Now be brave in the big way, the way that matters. Eleanor looked at her baby sister and felt a surge of love and gratitude. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too busy being stubborn to notice. Beatrice grinned. So are you going to the gala? I think I have to, even if it destroys me. It won't destroy you. You're a Whitmore. We're apparently indestructible. The month leading up to the gala was agonizing. Eleanor continued her pattern of honesty and amends, slowly rebuilding her reputation one conversation at a time, but her mind was constantly on Adrian. What was he doing? Was he thinking of her? Had the Duchess told him Eleanor would be at the gala? She caught glimpses of him occasionally, across the street, entering his club, climbing into a carriage. Each time her heart seized. He looked tired, unhappy, but he never looked her way, never acknowledged her presence. Maybe this was madness. Maybe she should just accept that she'd lost him and move on. But every time she considered giving up, she remembered his face when he'd told her he was falling in love with her. The vulnerability, the hope. She destroyed that. The least she could do was try to rebuild it. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear. Eleanor dressed carefully in a simple gown. No elaborate styling, no calculated glamour. Just her, as honest in appearance as she'd learned to be in words. Beatrice helped with her hair, pulling it back in a clean style that didn't hide her face. You look beautiful, her mother said, eyes wet. Your father would be proud of how you've handled all this. Father created this mess, Eleanor pointed out. Yes, but you're cleaning it up with more grace than he ever showed. That takes strength. Her mother squeezed her hand. Whatever happens tonight, know that you've already won. You've become someone worthy of the Duke. Whether he sees that or not is his choice. The gala was held at the Blackthorn estate, and Eleanor's hands shook as she climbed the steps. Inside, the ballroom glittered with candlelight and jewels. Society's elite mingled and danced, all here to support the foundation, and Eleanor suspected to see if the Duke would make an appearance. She spotted the Duchess across the room and made her way over. You came.
the Duchess said warmly. I wasn't certain you would. I almost didn't. Is he here? In his study. He won't come down. The Duchess's expression turned sympathetic. He knows you're attending. I told him. He said if I'd invited you, he'd stay upstairs. Eleanor's heart sank. So this was pointless. Not pointless. Strategic. The Duchess glanced around, then lowered her voice. In an hour, I'm going to announce the Foundation's latest initiative. Adrian will have to come down for that. He's the patron. It would be unconscionable for him to miss it. When he does, you'll have your chance. To do what? Ambush him. To be honest, publicly. Isn't that what you've been practicing? Before Eleanor could respond, Catherine Hartwell appeared at her elbow. Miss Whitmore, I was hoping you'd be here. Catherine's smile was genuine. I wanted to tell you what you've been doing these past weeks, the honesty campaign. It's been remarkable. People are talking, and not all of it is negative. That's kind of you to say. It's true. You've made mistakes, yes, but you're owning them. That's more than most of London society can claim. Catherine hesitated. For what it's worth, I think the Duke is a fool for letting you go. He's protecting himself. I can't blame him for that. Maybe. Or maybe he's hiding again. Either way, I hope tonight changes something. Catherine squeezed her arm and moved away. The hour passed in a blur of conversations and forced smiles. Eleanor danced when asked, spoke when spoken to, and tried not to watch the grand staircase for Adrian's appearance. Several people approached her, some curious, some sympathetic, a few openly hostile. Eleanor met each with the same calm honesty that had become her trademark. Then the Duchess took the stage, and the room quieted. Thank you all for coming tonight. As you know, the Thomas Blackthorne Educational Foundation has been supporting young men's education for 3 years now. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce an expansion of our mission. We'll be funding opportunities for young women as well, ensuring that financial circumstances don't determine intellectual potential. Applause rippled through the room. Eleanor clapped along, but her attention was on the staircase. Would he come? And now, I'd like to invite the Foundation's patron, my son, the Duke of Blackthorne, to say a few words. The room held its collective breath. Seconds ticked by. Then, finally, Adrian appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked terrible. His face was drawn, shadows under his eyes, and when his gaze swept the room and landed on Eleanor, she saw him freeze. For a moment, she thought he might turn around and leave. Instead, he descended slowly, each step measured and controlled. He reached the stage, took the position beside his mother, and began to speak. His voice was steady, but Eleanor heard the strain beneath it. Thank you for your continued support of this foundation. My brother Thomas believed education was the great equalizer, that with knowledge and opportunity, anyone could overcome their circumstances. He would be, Adrian's voice caught slightly, he would be proud of what we've accomplished in his name. The room was silent, everyone aware this was the first time the Duke had spoken publicly about his brother since the death. Adrian continued talking about the Foundation's goals, the lives changed, the futures made possible, but his eyes kept drifting to Eleanor and she saw something raw in his expression. When he finished, applause erupted. But before he could leave the stage, Eleanor found herself moving forward. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it. She just walked through the crowd until she stood at the base of the stage, looking up at him. Your Grace, she said, voice clear enough to carry. May I have a moment? The room went deadly quiet. Adrian stared down at her and she saw panic flash across his face. Miss Whitmore, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time. Eleanor's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. You've spent weeks avoiding me. If this is the only way to speak to you, then this is what I'll do. Eleanor, don't. His voice dropped to a plea only she could hear. Don't do this here. Why not? I've spent the past month being publicly honest about everything else. Why not this? She took a breath. You told me once that you preferred honesty to simpering agreement. So here's some honesty. I love you. I fell in love with you somewhere between the arguments and the art galleries and watching you learn to feel again. And yes, it started as manipulation. Yes, I used you, but what it became was real. Adrian's face had gone pale. Around them, Eleanor could hear whispers, gasps, the rustle of scandalized fans. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she continued. I'm not asking for anything except that you hear me. Hear that I know what I did was wrong, that I've spent every day since trying to be better, to be worthy of what you offered me. And whether you take me back or not, I need you to know you changed me, made me braver, more honest, more willing to face uncomfortable truths. You did that. Even when I was lying to you, you were making me into someone capable of truth. Eleanor, his voice was rough. I'm done. She stepped back, aware that tears were streaming down her face, but not caring. I just needed you to know, needed everyone to know. I love you, Adrian Blackthorne, and I'm sorry I hurt you, that's all. She turned to leave, to flee before the humiliation could fully sink in, but Adrian's voice stopped her. Wait. Eleanor froze. Slowly she turned back. Adrian was coming down from the stage, moving through the crowd toward her. When he reached her, he stopped, close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. You're right, he said quietly, though his voice carried in the silent room. You did use me. You manipulated my grief and my loneliness and my desperate need to feel something again. What you did was unforgivable. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. But you're also right that what we had became real. I felt it too. The shift from performance to genuine connection. And watching you these past weeks, seeing you humble yourself, tell the truth even when it cost you, rebuild your reputation on honesty instead of pretense. He stopped, swallowed hard. It's been the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. Adrian, I'm not done. He moved closer, and Eleanor saw his hand shaking. I told you I couldn't be with you because I'd always wonder if you meant what you said, if you were performing or being real. But I've realized something. I'll always wonder that about everyone. You didn't create my trust issues. Thomas's death did that. You just exposed them. He reached up, brushing away a tear on her cheek with his thumb. The question isn't whether you might lie to me again. The question is whether loving you, really loving you, with all your flaws and mistakes, is worth the risk of being hurt. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. And Eleanor, you are so worth the risk. The room erupted. Eleanor heard gasps, applause, shocked exclamations, but all she could focus on was Adrian's face, the vulnerability there, the hope. Are you saying? She couldn't finish. I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I've been miserable without you. I'm saying that watching you be so publicly brave has made me realize I need to be brave too, brave enough to forgive, brave enough to try again. He took her hands, brave enough to trust that what we have is real, even if it started as something else. I don't deserve this, Eleanor whispered. Don't deserve you. Probably not. But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing, and I choose you. Flawed, manipulative, brutally honest you. His mouth curved in the first real smile she'd seen from him in weeks. If you'll have me. Eleanor laughed through her tears. If I'll have you, Adrian, I just confessed my love for you in front of all of London. Of course I'll have you. He pulled her close, and she felt his arms wrap around her like coming home. Around them, the crowd was going wild. Applause, cheers, a few scandalized gasps from the older generation. But Eleanor didn't care. She buried her face in his chest and let herself cry, relief and joy and disbelief all mixed together. I'm still angry, Adrian murmured into her hair, and it's going to take time to fully trust again. This isn't a fairy tale where everything is magically fixed. I know, I don't expect magic, just a chance. You have it, all the chances you need. He pulled back to look at her face. But Eleanor, if you ever lie to me again, I won't, I swear. I'm done with lies. They cost too much. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I believe you. Just like that? Just like that. Because you're right. Love is a leap of faith, and I'm done being too afraid to jump. The Duchess appeared beside them, beaming. Well, that was dramatic. Mother, Adrian said without looking away from Eleanor, did you plan this? Plan what? I simply invited Miss Whitmore to the gala. What you two chose to do was entirely your own decision. Her smile turned mischievous. Though I may have mentioned to a few key people that something interesting might happen tonight. The room is quite full, isn't it? Adrian groaned. You're incorrigible. I'm strategic. There's a difference. She patted his arm. Now I believe tradition dictates that after such a public declaration, the gentleman asks the lady to dance. Adrian turned to Eleanor, offering his hand with exaggerated formality. Miss Whitmore, would you do me the honor? I'd love to, Your Grace. They moved to the dance floor, and as the music started, Eleanor realized she was shaking. Adrian pulled her closer than was strictly proper, and she felt his hand warm and steady at her waist. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Everyone's watching. There's no taking it back now. Good. I don't want to take it back. He looked down at her, and she saw love and determination in his eyes. I want everyone to know you're mine, and I'm yours, flawed and complicated as we both are. They danced in silence for a moment, and Eleanor let herself simply feel it. The music, the warmth of his hand, the solid reality of him after weeks of aching absence. What happens now? She finally asked. Now? Now we figure this out together, build something real on the ashes of what was fake. Learn to trust each other, really trust, not just claim to. He spun her gently. And eventually, if you'll have me, I'm going to ask you to marry me properly. Not because of scandal or debt or social pressure, just because I love you and want to spend my life with you. Eleanor's breath caught. Eventually? I'm thinking 6 months. Long enough to court you properly, to prove to both of us that this is real. His smile turned playful. Think you can be patient that long? After everything, I think I can manage 6 months. Good, because I plan to spend them being thoroughly, embarrassingly in love with you. Fair warning. Eleanor laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Around them, the gala continued, but in this moment, wrapped in Adrian's arms with the future stretching bright before them, Eleanor felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, honest, hard-won hope. And this time, she hadn't manipulated or calculated her way to it. She'd earned it through truth and bravery and the willingness to risk everything for love. It was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely worth it. The 6 months Adrian had promised turned out to be nothing like Eleanor expected. She'd imagined a careful, measured courtship. Polite calls, chaperoned walks, the slow rebuilding of trust through restrained interaction. Instead, Adrian threw himself into loving her with the same intensity he'd once used to keep the world at arm's length. 3 days after the gala, he appeared at her door with a stack of books. What's this? Eleanor asked, staring at the tower of leather-bound volumes. Your education. You mentioned once wanting to read more Italian literature, but never having access to proper translations. I had these sent from my library. He deposited them on her hall table. Also, there's a reading group that meets on Thursdays. I thought you might enjoy it. You're inviting me to a reading group? I'm inviting you to everything. That's the point of courting, isn't it? Sharing the things that matter? He looked suddenly uncertain. Unless you don't want to read Italian literature. I shouldn't have assumed. Eleanor kissed him, cutting off his rambling. When she pulled back, his eyes were dazed. I love Italian literature, she said, and I love that you remembered. I remember everything you've ever told me, Adrian admitted. It's possibly excessive. It's perfect, but it wasn't always perfect. 2 weeks later, they had their first real fight. It started over something small. Eleanor mentioned seeing one of her father's old creditors at a shop, and Adrian immediately offered to speak to the man to ensure he wasn't bothering her. I don't need you to fight my battles, Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice even. I'm not fighting them, I'm helping. It feels like you don't trust me to handle my own affairs. Adrian's expression shuddered. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Every time something difficult comes up, you try to solve it for me, as if I'm not capable. I know you're capable. I'm trying to be supportive. You're trying to control the situation so nothing can hurt me. There's a difference. The words hung between them, sharp and cutting. Adrian's jaw tightened. And what's wrong with wanting to protect you? Nothing. Unless you're doing it because you don't trust me to tell you when I actually need help. Unless you're solving problems I didn't ask you to solve because you're afraid if you don't, I'll manipulate you again. Adrian flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? You said we'd work on trust, but trust means believing I'll come to you when I need you, not assuming I'm always on the verge of disaster. Eleanor's voice cracked. I made terrible choices when I was desperate. I know that, but I'm not that person anymore, and I need you to see me as I am now, not as I was then. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. You're right. I've been hovering, trying to anticipate problems before they arise because I'm terrified of being blindsided again. I know, and I understand why, but Adrian, we can't build something real if you're constantly waiting for me to betray you. I'm not waiting for betrayal. I'm trying to prevent circumstances that might lead to it. That's the same thing. You're just using prettier words. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. So what do you want from me? To just trust blindly? No. I want you to trust deliberately, consciously, even when it's hard, even when your instincts tell you to protect yourself. Eleanor moved closer, taking his hands. I can't prove I won't hurt you again. No one can promise that. But I can promise I'll tell you the truth, even when it's ugly, even when it costs me. And you have to promise to believe me when I do. Adrian looked down at their joined hands. I don't know if I know how to do that. Then we'll learn together, because the alternative is spending the rest of our lives in this careful dance where neither of us is really vulnerable. And I don't want that. Do you? No. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. No, I want real, even if it terrifies me. Me too. They stood there holding each other, and Eleanor felt something shift. This was what healing looked like. Not smooth or easy, but honest and deliberate. Choosing trust over fear, again and again, until it became habit instead of effort. The fights didn't stop. They argued about Adrian's tendency to withdraw when hurt, about Eleanor's habit of trying to fix everything herself, about whose family they'd visit for holidays, and whether the Duchess's meddling was endearing or intrusive. But they also laughed, spent hours in bookshops arguing about translations, attended lectures and galleries, and walked in the park where Adrian had first told her she saw past his walls. Slowly, carefully, they built something that felt solid beneath their feet. 4 months into the courtship, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. Lord Densworth appeared at her door looking uncomfortable and slightly sheepish. Miss Whitmore, I was hoping we might speak about Adrian. Eleanor led him to the drawing room, curious. She'd met Densworth several times. He was one of Adrian's oldest friends, though the relationship had been strained since Thomas's death. I owe you an apology, Densworth said without preamble. I've been telling people for years that Adrian was cold, calculating, insufferable. I said those things because I was angry. Angry that he shut me out after Thomas died. Angry that he left for the continent without a word. Angry that he came back even more closed off than before. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw you two together at the opera last week. And he was different, laughing, engaged, actually present instead of just going through the motions. Densworth's expression was earnest. You brought him back somehow, made him remember how to be human instead of just functional. And I wanted you to know the things I said about him before, the rumors I helped spread, they were true, but they weren't the whole truth. What's the whole truth? That Adrian Blackthorne is the most loyal, honorable man I know. That he loved his brother so fiercely it nearly destroyed him when Thomas died. That he blames himself for things that weren't his fault and punishes himself by refusing to feel anything good. Densworth met her eyes. And that he's loved you from the moment you told him he was hiding from grief. He just didn't know how to let himself have you. Eleanor's throat tightened. Thank you for telling me. Don't thank me. Just keep making him laugh like that. Keep reminding him he's allowed to be happy. Densworth stood. And maybe, when the time comes, convince him to forgive me for being a terrible friend when he needed me most. After he left, Eleanor sat alone in the drawing room, thinking about Adrian's layers. How many people had misjudged him because he'd been too hurt to let them see the truth? How many friendships had he sacrificed because vulnerability felt too dangerous? She found him that evening at his townhouse, in the library where they'd first been caught together all those months ago. Densworth came to see me, she said without preamble. Adrian looked up from his book, expression carefully neutral. What did he want? To apologize for the things he said about you, for being a bad friend, for not seeing past your walls when you needed him to. He had no obligation to see past anything. I pushed him away. Because you were grieving and didn't know how to let anyone help. Eleanor sat beside him. He wants forgiveness. Are you going to give it to him? Adrian was quiet for a long time. I don't know if I remember how to be his friend. We've been distant for so long. So start over. Start from where you are now instead of trying to recapture what was. Eleanor took his hand. You're relearning how to trust me. Maybe you could relearn how to trust him too. And Catherine Hartwell and all the other people you've been holding at arm's length because it felt safer than risking connection. That sounds exhausting. It is. But the alternative is staying isolated forever. And you've already proven you're brave enough to try. She squeezed his fingers. You chose me. Choose them too. Let yourself have friends again. Adrian pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. You make it sound simple. It's not, but you don't have to do it alone. That's the whole point of not being alone anymore. He kissed her then, soft and searching, and Eleanor felt the question in it. Can I really do this? Can I really let people back in? She kissed him back with an answer. Yes. And I'll be here while you try. The next week, Adrian invited Densworth for drinks, then Catherine Hartwell and her brother for dinner. Slowly, tentatively, he began rebuilding bridges he'd burned 3 years ago. Some reconnections were awkward. Some failed entirely, people who'd moved on or couldn't forgive being pushed away. But some succeeded, and Eleanor watched Adrian's world expand beyond just her and his mother. She was doing her own expanding, too. The reading group had led to friendships with women who appreciated her directness. She'd started volunteering at the Thomas Blackthorne Foundation, helping young women navigate educational opportunities. Her family's finances were stable now, carefully managed, and Beatrice had blossomed with the security. Everything was coming together. Then, 5.5 months into the courtship, Eleanor discovered something that threatened to unravel it all. She was at the foundation office reviewing applications when she found a letter addressed to Adrian. She wouldn't have opened it. She'd learned her lesson about boundaries, but it was marked urgent and he was unreachable for the afternoon. Inside was a notice from a bank about a loan made out to Eleanor's family, a loan she'd known nothing about. Her hands shook as she read the details. £5,000, the exact amount Adrian had given them to pay off the debts. Except it hadn't been a gift. It had been a loan, with terms and interest rates and a repayment schedule that started next month. Eleanor felt sick. She'd thought he'd paid their debts outright, asking nothing in return. But this was different. This meant they still owed him, meant her family was still bound to him financially, meant perhaps that he'd never really trusted her at all, that he'd kept this leverage in place just in case. She confronted him that evening at his townhouse, the letter clutched in white-knuckled hands. What is this? Adrian looked up from his desk, saw the paper, and went very still. Where did you find that? At the foundation office. It was marked urgent. Eleanor's voice shook. Why is there a loan? You said you were paying our debts. You said it was a gift. I did pay the debts. This is separate. How is it separate? It's the exact same amount. Adrian stood, moving around the desk toward her. Eleanor, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been holding financial leverage over my family for 6 months? That you never really let go of the power dynamic between us? That's not what this is. Then what is it? She threw the letter on his desk. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you paid off our creditors but made yourself the new creditor, which means we're still in debt, still obligated, still, her voice cracked, still something you can control. Adrian's face had gone pale. You think I would do that? Use money to control you? I don't know. You tell me why there's a loan agreement I knew nothing about. Because your mother asked for it. The words hit like a slap. Eleanor stared at him. What? Adrian ran a hand through his hair, agitated. After I gave your family the money, your mother came to see me. She said she couldn't accept charity, that it made her feel helpless. She insisted on some kind of repayment structure, something that let her maintain dignity. So I drew up a loan agreement, incredibly favorable terms, interest barely above nothing, and she signed it. She asked me not to tell you because she knew you'd refuse. Eleanor's mind reeled. You're lying. I'm not. Ask her yourself. Adrian's voice was rough. I didn't want a loan agreement. I wanted to help without strings. But she insisted, and I thought maybe it would help her feel less like a charity case. So I agreed. And you never thought to mention this to me? I promised your mother I wouldn't. She said you'd already sacrificed enough, that you didn't need to carry the weight of debt too. She wanted to handle it herself. Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. I don't understand. Your mother has been making payments every month, small amounts. She's working, did you know that?
taking in sewing, helping with other families' accounts, doing everything she can to pay me back on her own terms. Adrian knelt beside her chair. I've been putting the money aside. Was going to give it back to her as a wedding gift when we married. The loan was never real, Eleanor. It was just a way to let her keep her pride. You should have told me. I know, but I promised. And I thought... He stopped, swallowed hard. I thought maybe this was a way to prove I could keep your family's confidences, that I could be trusted with secrets. Eleanor looked at him, saw the honesty in his eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. You're an idiot. I know. A well-meaning idiot, but still an idiot. I know that too. She reached out, cupping his face. You don't prove trustworthiness by keeping secrets. You prove it by being honest, even when it's complicated. I'm still learning that part, Adrian admitted. Apparently I'm not very good at it yet. None of us are. Eleanor pulled him close, resting her forehead against his. But we're trying. That has to count for something. They sat there in silence for a long moment, breathing together, letting the crisis pass. Finally, Adrian said, I should have told you. The moment your mother made me promise, I should have told you anyway. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, too, for assuming the worst, for not giving you a chance to explain before I attacked. We're a disaster, Adrian observed. Yes, but we're an honest disaster now. That's progress. He laughed, and Eleanor felt the sound vibrate through both of them. When did you become an optimist? When I fell in love with a pessimist, someone had to balance things out. That night, Eleanor went home and confronted her mother, who confirmed everything Adrian had said. They fought. A real messy fight about pride and secrets and the cost of independence. But they also talked honestly, maybe for the first time since Eleanor's father had died. I couldn't just take his money, her mother said, tears streaming. Not after what you'd been through to get it. I needed to contribute somehow, to feel like I was part of the solution instead of just the problem. You were never the problem, Mama. Father's choices were the problem, and I enabled those choices. Looked the other way. Let it get so bad that you had to sacrifice yourself to fix it. Her mother gripped her hands. I couldn't live with that. So I've been working, saving, trying to pay back what I can. It's not much, but it's something. Eleanor hugged her mother tightly. You don't have to fix everything alone. That's what I've been learning. We're allowed to accept help. Even from the man you love? Especially from him. That's what love is, isn't it? Helping each other without keeping score. Her mother pulled back, searching her face. You really love him. Not for the money or security, just for him. Just for him, Eleanor confirmed. With all his flaws and walls and terrible communication skills, I love him. Then marry him. When he asks, don't make him wait the full 6 months if you already know. I think I need the full 6 months. We both do. To prove we can do this, the hard conversations, the fights, the rebuilding of trust. If we can survive 6 months of honestly trying, we can survive a lifetime. Her mother smiled through her tears. When did you get so wise? When I almost lost everything that mattered. Turns out consequences are excellent teachers. The final month of courtship passed in a blur of honesty and arguments and slow, steady trust building. Adrian introduced Eleanor to more of his friends, including some who'd known Thomas. Eleanor brought Adrian to volunteer at the foundation, watching him interact with the young people they were helping. They fought about little things, whether to attend a ball or stay home reading, whose family's estate to visit for Christmas, whether Adrian's tendency to brood was charming or concerning. But they also learned to fight fair, to speak honestly without cruelty, to apologize and mean it. And slowly Eleanor felt the last of her guilt about their beginning fade. Not because it didn't matter, it would always matter, but because they'd built something new on top of it, something stronger for having survived the weight of their mistakes. 6 months to the day after the gala, Adrian took Eleanor back to the park where they'd first walked together. It was cold, the trees bare, and Eleanor's breath made clouds in the December air. You're very mysterious today, she observed, watching Adrian fidget with something in his pocket. I'm nervous. About what? We've survived 6 months of brutal honesty. What could be more terrifying than that? This. He pulled out a small velvet box and dropped to one knee right there on the path. Eleanor's breath caught. She'd known this was coming. They'd talked about marriage, about futures, about what they wanted. But seeing him kneeling in the frozen grass, box in hand,
made it suddenly real. "Eleanor Whitmore," Adrian said, and she heard his voice shake. "6 months ago, I promised to court you properly, to prove this was real, to build something worthy of us both. I hope, we've done that." "Adrian, let me finish, please. I've been practicing." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "This was my grandmother's. She gave it to my mother with instructions to pass it to me when I found someone worth trusting with it. Someone brave enough to call me on my nonsense, honest enough to tell me hard truths, and patient enough to weather my terrible habit of withdrawing when I'm hurt." Eleanor laughed through sudden tears. "That's a very specific list. You meet all the criteria. Also, I love you. Desperately. Completely. In a way that still terrifies me, but that I'm learning to embrace because you're worth the fear." He took a shaky breath. "So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you spend your life fighting with me and making up and being honest even when it's awful and building something real together?" "Yes." Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely yes." Adrian slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, then stood and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like relief and joy and promise. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor saw tears on his face. "I can't believe you said yes," he whispered. "After everything we've survived? This was the easy part." She kissed him again. "The hard part is living up to the promises, and we'll do that together." They walked home hand in hand, and Eleanor felt lighter than she had in years. No secrets, no manipulation, no desperate calculations, just two imperfect people who'd chosen each other, flaws and all. The wedding took place 3 months later in a small ceremony that was more honest than elegant. Eleanor wore a simple dress, insisted on writing her own vows, and refused to pretend the journey to this moment had been anything other than messy. "I stand here today," she said, holding Adrian's hands in front of their assembled friends and family. "Not because this was always meant to be. Not because we had some grand romance from the start. I stand here because I made terrible choices, and you made the choice to forgive me. Because we both decided that being honest was more important than being perfect." Adrian's eyes were wet as he replied, "I stand here because you refused to let me hide. Because you saw past my walls and called me out when I tried to rebuild them. Because loving you taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's the only real strength any of us have." There wasn't a dry eye in the small chapel. Even the Duchess, who'd masterminded so much of this, was dabbing at her face with a handkerchief. When the vicar pronounced them married, the kiss felt like a beginning rather than an ending. The start of a life built on truth instead of pretense. The reception was held at the Blackthorn estate, and Eleanor found herself surrounded by people who'd watched their entire messy journey. Catherine Hartwell raised a glass in toast. To the couple who proved that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start badly and get better through sheer stubborn honesty, Lord Densworth added, and to Adrian, who finally remembered how to smile. And to Eleanor, Beatrice chimed in, who saved us all and only manipulated one duke in the process. The room erupted in laughter, and Eleanor felt Adrian's arm tighten around her waist. "Are you sure about this?" he murmured in her ear. "It's not too late to run." "From you? Never. You're stuck with me now." "Good, that was the plan." Later, as the party wound down, Eleanor found herself alone with Adrian on the balcony overlooking the garden. London spread out before them, lights twinkling in the darkness. "Do you ever think about how it started?" Eleanor asked quietly. "How calculated and awful I was." "Sometimes," Adrian admitted, "but then I remember where we are now, how we got here. And I think maybe we needed that awful beginning to get to this honest middle." "This isn't the middle, this is the beginning." "Fair point." He pulled her close. "So what happens in our beginning?" "We live, we fight, we make up, we keep being honest even when it's hard." Eleanor looked up at him. "We build a life that's messy and real and nothing like the perfect story people imagine." "Sounds terrible." "Sounds perfect." They stood there as the cold night air holding each other, and Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought them here, the desperation and manipulation that had started it, the pain and honesty that had nearly ended it, the choice to forgive and rebuild that had saved it. She'd set out to trap a duke and save her family. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't known she needed, Someone who saw all her flaws and loved her anyway. Someone who'd been just as broken as she was, just as desperate for connection, just as terrified of vulnerability. Together, they'd learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up honestly, again and again, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt.
I love you, Eleanor said. In case I haven't mentioned it in the last 5 minutes, I love you too, my manipulative, brilliant, brutally honest wife. You're a formerly manipulative wife. I'm retired from scheming. Are you, though? Because I saw you talking to my mother earlier and it looked suspiciously like plotting. Eleanor laughed. That was just discussing the Foundation's expansion. Completely innocent. Nothing you do is completely innocent. That's part of your charm. And nothing you do is completely spontaneous. That's part of yours. They smiled at each other, two imperfect people who'd found a way to make their flaws fit together instead of tear them apart. Inside, the party continued. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the garden in white. And standing on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor and Adrian began the messy, beautiful work of building a life together. Not a perfect life, not a smooth one, but a real one, built on honesty and forgiveness and the stubborn belief that love was worth fighting for, even when, especially when, it was hard. In the end, Eleanor had set out to save her family by winning a duke's heart through manipulation. What she'd actually done was save herself by learning to be honest. And in that honesty, she'd found not just financial security or social standing, but something far more valuable. She'd found home. Not in a place or a title or a fortune, but in a person. A difficult, complicated, beautifully flawed person who'd been brave enough to trust her again after she'd broken that trust. And that, Eleanor thought as Adrian kissed her temple and pulled her back inside to their waiting guests, was worth more than all the calculated schemes in the world. Sometimes the best endings were the ones you couldn't plan. The ones that came from being brave enough to be honest, vulnerable enough to apologize, and stubborn enough to keep trying even when it seemed hopeless. She'd made terrible choices. They both had. But they'd also made the choice to grow from those mistakes instead of being defined by them. And as Eleanor danced with her husband in the candlelit ballroom, surrounded by people who'd watched them stumble and fall and get back up again, she knew they'd keep making that choice. Every day. For the rest of their lives. It wouldn't always be easy, but it would always be real. And real, Eleanor had learned, was so much better than perfect.